you. Okay, can everybody hear me? I think you can, as I can. It's good to see everybody. Thank you for coming. If you're wondering about the eye, I had a detached retina that got fixed, sort of, and then I had to have another surgery last Friday. So I'm good. I just have I've got an oil bubble behind my eye. So if I look through my eye out to all of you, I see oil through this eye, but not this eye. So it makes my brain work overtime. And I don't know if I could do that and read at the same time. Definitely couldn't do that and read and drink water, and chewing gum is out of the question. But we've got a great opportunity here. This is another episode in our Limitless, HKS Limitless series. This series was designed to promote thought leadership by bringing together experts across many industries to explore innovative ideas, influencing design. So influencing design in the built environment through a particular lens of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. So through this, we examine the strengths and weaknesses of our current design thinking, HKS current design thinking, and we look for ways to improve that and to innovate and to really, as we've said, to be the most influential firm in the industry. We want to be influential within this space. So today's discussion is making spaces equitable places, making spaces equitable places for all. We'll be focusing on the impact of the built environment as a social determinant of health, specifically how to improve health and well-being outcomes for all people. So that inclusivity aspect of health for all people. So we've got many people here from the real estate investment to city planning and partnerships. We're going to be using the city of Dallas as a microcosm of our national and global efforts to invest in and create healthier and more equitable societies and communities. So HKS is a global architecture firm. We have 26 offices worldwide, 1,600 people, but this is our world headquarters. So this is a city that has continued to astound people. It's not on a coast. It's not really on a major river for trade, but yet it's defied all odds, and it continues to lead the nation by most metrics in growth. So for us, it's now more important than ever for our firm to focus on this community in which we serve, not only as architects, but also citizens. So it's not just being, what we do as a firm, but how we're connected to our community through citizenship. So our goal is to foster meaningful connections and be agents of positive change. Basically, we're trying to do that by influencing policy, planning, and design. I think we've done a decent job at design, a less decent job at planning, and we've just scratched the surface on policy. When you think of public policy and you think of some of the cities that might have a more aggressive public policy, and by that I mean public policy that tries to shape the urban environment. We don't do much of that here in Dallas. And, I think some people think that's good. And I'm not arguing for bigger government. I'm not arguing for government to get into our business. But I am arguing for a dialogue between design professionals and people that do make public policy to determine, is there a way that we can make more connected communities? Is there something we can do with zoning and codes that would allow for separate developers who are working on projects to have some kind of cohesive connection between them? Is there something in the code that would encourage that? Maybe let them have a higher FAR. Maybe, I'll give that, if they give back green space, they get that higher FAR. So there's many things we can do. Maybe lax a bit on the zoning type. Maybe be a little bit more thoughtful about, is it a mono, one singular myopic kind of zoning type, or is it a multi-zoning type? So there's so many things in public policy that could influence this. And I really want our firm, I've talked to Erin about this, talked to Julie, Marcia Getto-Akins, and many about how can we get involved in the city of Dallas to be more influential in public policy. So my story, is, I can't see it. My story is, so I did most of my work globally. For about 30 years, I was a designer in health and commercial, and I did so much work globally, but so little work in Dallas. And when I became CEO 10 years ago, I thought I'd like to be more connected to the community in which I live. I'd like to run into, council people that I know at the grocery store. I'd like to, have a foundation in this community where I live. So that's something that I've always been interested in. How can we give back more to Dallas? Dallas right now is home to 8 million people. When I came here in 1983, it was home to 3 million people. It's about to be home to 10 million people. So it'll hit 10 million people probably in the next decade. So it'll surpass Chicago as the third largest metropolitan area in the United States by sometime in the next decade. So we have an incredible opportunity to help shape this metropolitan area into a more livable, sustainable, and equitable metropolis. And it is a metropolis. So I'm looking forward to what the panel has to say on this topic. They are all of opinions, I know. And we have Erin Peavey, our Director of Health and Wellbeing, the design leader for community. Erin is an award-winning architect and researcher active in Dallas community and is an appointee of the South Dallas Fair Park Opportunity Fund Board. So we're thrilled to not only have her representing our firm as a member of our firm, but also hosting and organizing this today. So thank you, Erin, and the floor is yours.
Is this? It is. It's on. Okay. You guys, this has been an exercise in resilience, AKA flexibility. Dr. Carter's in the front row nodding. Thank you so much to Dan for being here. We so greatly appreciate you kicking us off and dedicating so much of your time and energy to the city of Dallas. I've been told that I can minimize these slides and then control this board. All right, so I'm going to show you guys. First, we're going to start with some CEU. So if you want your CEU credits, take a quick gander right there. We had originally, okay, I'm going to wait for you guys to do that. Do some songs about CEUs. Okay. All right. When I start seeing the phones go down, then all right. So originally, Dr. Lorin Carter, who's here in the front row, was going to give a keynote to really kick us off. And she's still going to give a keynote, but more to wrap us up and join us for Q&A, because at the last minute, at the end of yesterday, Councilmember Paul Ridley let us know that he was sick. He has bronchitis, and we are forever in the debt. Can we give a round of applause to Councilmember Janie Schultz from District 11? Janie, you've saved us. We are forever grateful. So, I'll be giving Dr. Lorin Carter a full intro in a little bit, but we're going to start with our amazing panel here. And if you guys don't know them already, their reading of their bios could take the entire time we have allotted. So I have desperately shortened them, and I hope they forgive me. So Councilmember Janie Schultz. Janie represents District 11, stretching from Walnut Hill to Richardson area. She's a proven leader with more than 30 years of business and charitable experience. And she has been serving on the City Planning Commission starting almost a decade ago. And then we have Dr. Maria Martinez-Cosio. Maria is the interim dean of the College of Architecture, Planning, and Public Affairs at University of Texas at Arlington, where our lovely keynote went to college. Whoop, whoop. Yeah, for all the UTA. Oh, sorry, that was loud. So you guys have been such an amazing partner to HKS through all the years. I don't have enough, time to say everything that I feel towards the great gratitude for you being here today and for all that you guys have done. And Dr. Christopher Dowdy. Chris is the Larry James Fellow at Forest Forward, where he conducts independent research and advisory in the struggle against poverty. And building on the vision of the Historic Theater, which is an HKS project that we are very proud of right here in our backyard, has really been helping them to bring that vision for healthy, vibrant South Dallas to fruition. And last, but definitely not least, we are so happy that you made it. He had some, it's really hard to find our parking garage, I'm not gonna lie. So Murphy Cheatham. Murphy is the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Manager of the Americas at one of the largest commercial real estate firms in the globe, CBRE. And he has served so many different roles, leading multi-million-dollar deals in affordable housing, mixed-use real estate, and serving as the youngest chief of housing and business development in the city of Shreveport, Louisiana. Just a tip of the iceberg. All right. So thank you all so much for being here. Can we give them a big round of applause? Woo! So our agenda today, we're going to start with some questions. Then we're going to let wonderful Councilmember Schultz head out to her meeting. We're going to bring on Dr. Carter, and then she's going to rejoin us for a wonderful and engaging Q&A. So get your questions ready. Think about what's important to you and what you want to hear them talk about. So let's start with, I think Dan really laid a great foundation here, but a lot of people don't intuitively understand the relationship between health, well-being, and the built environment. They think, oh, well, health happens through healthcare or health policy or through your diet and exercise. What they don't understand is that the way that our cities are designed is this constant underlying influence. It's like the stage that we're on today. It helps to determine whether you all can see us, whether you can hear us. And similarly, it decides a lot of the fates of the communities that live in those built environments and work in those built environments. So I want to start with examples. I want to start with like the hopeful side, because we're going to get into some of the struggles that we've also had. But when you think about right here in our backyards, what are some examples that you're excited about or that make you more hopeful about how the built environment can advance health and well-being here in our own backyards? Yeah, Janie, you want to start?
I think from a broad level, the thing that I'm most hopeful about is the adoption of the City Council Racial Equity Plan, because the Racial Equity Plan actually has indicators that you can go look at that include the built environment, includes health, includes income, includes every aspect of life. And because the council adopted it, we are now obliged to activate that plan. And so I am very, very excited about it. We're doing it from angles. And the other thing that I want to just put out there from the get-go is, to me, health is way more than just physical health. I think, and in addition to mental health, we also need social health. And so in Dallas, with our racial history, I think what the Racial Equity Plan has done is racial equity indicators were our checkup. And now we know the prognosis, and we are beginning to have conversations that for years we avoided as a city, that now we must talk about. And it's such a relief for me to be able to safely talk about some of these issues. So I know I was very broad, but I'll move it on to my colleagues to maybe dig in.
Can you guys hear me? No, thank you for that. Thank you for being here. Again, I'm Murphy Cheatham with CBRE. We create an inclusive environment where everybody feels safe, valued, and heard. And we ingrain that not only at the corporate level, but all the way down through each of our lines of business partners. As someone being a California native, sorry you all, don't hate me. I see the t-shirts like "Don't California my Texas" and all that stuff, right? I moved here in 07, so I wasn't part of this last wave. I was not prepared to live in Dallas. I'll be honest about that. So from San Francisco Bay Area, went to an HBCU, went to Graham Lake State University in Louisiana, received my master's in real estate development from Arizona State. I lived in Arizona for 6 years, and my parents retired in the Bay. They moved back to Louisiana. So Dallas was close enough, but far enough for my family, right? And so when I moved here, I assumed a lot, right? I assumed because of the big skyline and because of all the sports teams and all the universities, that Dallas was a lot more progressive than what it was, right? I was very ignorant to the, what's the best way to put it? I was, not only racism, but just the structure that was in place. I mean, if you all go up to the Tower Club and if you look north, east, and west, you can see development. If you look Oh, I think I'm just too loud. You guys hear me okay if I talk like this? Oh, sorry. Hello?
It's going to come rescue us.
So the physical socioeconomic barriers of I-30 and then the Trinity River, I was just completely ignorant to and unaware of, right? So the things that I'm happy about, the investment of the Southern Dallas Fund, that Tilly Borcher successfully implemented $40 million of investment south of I-30, what Peter Brodsky and Tim Maiden are doing down at Southwest Center Mall. Those are great tangible things. I do believe that there is a strong place for nonprofits, and I champion that. But I think private business and private equity and private investment is always going to lead the way, right? So I'm happy to see that, because prior to Southwest Mall or Redbird Mall or whatever people call it, there was only 3 office towers built south of I-30 since Dr. King died, right? There's been more than that redeveloped in Uptown in the past 2 or 3 years. So when we look at tangible change and tangible investment, I think we have to lead with private dollars. Government policy is great, nonprofit is great, but we all know that private dollars lead government policy and lead politicians. So that's my 2 cents about that.
Wonderful. Speaking of nonprofit,
Okay,
Chris.
I'm trying to be differential.
Yeah.
But we're gonna,
Yeah. That's good. That's good.
So, Murphy, absolutely. I flew in last night, and you can see where the lights stop, over the city. And it's always stuck with me on that approach. I think about the work we're doing right now at the Forest Theater and in that part of South Dallas, right, the MLK corridor that goes from Fair Park down to the river. And what's happening right now with we're just adjacent to one of the Highways to Boulevards programs that's taking down 175. It's very exciting. It's the kind of thing you could only sort of hope for and advocate for. And then to see it materialize is incredible, or dematerialize. It is incredible to see that one of those highways come down that trapped that neighborhood in a sort of pincer that has choked the life out of it for years. And to see that come down and open up some opportunities to hopefully reconnect that neighborhood is really inspirational. What we're doing in that space is thinking about what you do to get de-resourced communities the neighborhoods they deserve. How do we advocate and step in and augment and support and stand alongside people who know what they want, who know the kinds of communities they deserve? How do we support that process? And we've partnered with several organizations that both in town and nationally to sort of think through the best approaches to that. We work with purpose-built communities out of Atlanta to develop part of their model and deploy that in our area to drive the social and environmental determinants of health to a better outcome for that community. Since people, as you know, depending on where you're born here in Dallas, you can take 5 to 10 years off your life, which is arbitrary and horrific. And we think that the way to repair that is by thinking about all the things people need, not just dropping a shiny project in and saying we're done, but thinking about how we over years and years develop the trust and struggle alongside and think through the right different strategies so that we can develop the cultural and economic enterprises that are going to make the most sense for that neighborhood, to give them power over the sorts of things they get to enjoy and the sorts of places they get to shop. We think that it means we need to develop strategy and support around housing, around being able to keep the people, the seniors that live in that area, the people with low to no income that live in that area, to make sure that there's a berth for them, as well as new affordable housing coming in for other people and market rate that comes in to drive that profit-driven model that Murphy loves so much. We want to think about those things and push that strategy. And then also education, where the most visible thing we do is the theater and its renovation. There's all sorts of great attention being given to that. And you saw it on the marketing material for this event being developed. But the project that's happening right now, it's already underway before we break ground on the theater, before we break ground on housing, is supporting the MLK Arts Academy. Is advocating alongside them, getting to know their principal, getting to know their teachers, helping develop arts programming for those students who deserve a pathway from their communities to Booker T and other great opportunities around the city and nationally. And historically, a fraction of the students that attend the competitive high school performing arts magnet here in town, only a fraction have come from the 75215 zip code. Which is South Dallas, Fair Park, where Forest Ford is located. Exactly. And thank you, Erin. So what we're doing, and what I find really exciting about the project that I really have just joined in the past year, is to see those strategies deployed at the same time. Because what I learned at Paul Quinn after 8.5 years was that you cannot just do one or two nice things for people and call it a day. You can't drop a shiny project or a program, finish something big, and say that you've done your job. We have to be embedded within and accountable to the communities that we serve and live alongside. And that's part of what we're doing at Forest Theater.
And I'm definitely going to be following up with some implementation questions as we move along. But Maria, I would love to hear from you. What are some of your thoughts?
I think can you hear me now? There it goes. Okay. So I'm an urbanist. I'm an urban sociologist. And I'm from California, San Diego, 19 years. So my kids call themselves Cali Texans now. So I think that as an urbanist and as somebody that studied urban communities for a long time, Dallas has so many other components that are integral for a successful city, right? We have the diversity, we have a thriving downtown, we have an economy that's booming, we have, transportation, right? Which we don't in Arlington, hoping to work on that at some point. But I think, again, there are all of these components. How do you weave them together to respond to changing demographics? We know that density works, right? We know density works. People want to live in walkable communities. They want to walk to the grocery store and see the neighbors there. Do you? I mean, most of you, I would think, right? You moved to Dallas because you want that urban environment. But yet we get in our own way. We don't have affordable housing, right? We don't have ways for people to thrive here if they differ in education level, economic level. Women, we don't design cities for women. Do you feel safe walking into one of these parking structures late at night by yourself? Anybody? I don't, right? So again, how do we design spaces to respond to a variety of people that you want to see in a localized place? And to me, Dallas has all those components. So then now how do we shift it? How do we start designing? How do we start implementing by responding by the folks you want downtown? Or do you want in a particular neighborhood? You need to ask those folks. You need to engage those folks, and I don't know that we always do that. I think, unfortunately, as somebody who has probably more degrees than I should, and they kick me out of school and say, go get a job. We think we know stuff, but we don't. To me, particularly having a PhD showed me that there's a whole lot that I don't know. And Dr. Carr is probably different because she's much brighter than I am. But I think that, again, how do we engage the people that are most affected, that we want in a particular place, to guide that process? We know what our demographics are doing. We're an aging population. I don't want to live in a suburb when I'm old. I see how my neighbors, how their mental health declined when their spouse or significant other or their partner passed away, and they hide themselves in their house because there's no public transportation. You can't get anywhere without somebody driving you. You can't drive once you lose your license, right? Because of health reasons, you're completely isolated. How do we respond to that? We know that's happening. How do we respond to that? And how can we use, again, the components that make downtown in particular, and not just Dallas, other downtowns or other areas where we already have some density? How do we build it up? And again, history already told us how to do that. Jane Jacobs is still my favorite, right? Go back and look at her stuff. It's all there. So what's our resistance to implementing what we know works, and how do we engage with policy to make that happen?
Yeah. Oh, please go ahead.
Oh, there we go. Can I ask y'all a question? Okay, how many of you rent?
Rent.
Raise your hand if you rent where you live. What about you guys back there? So clearly at least 2/3, 41% of Dallas is rental. And yet all of the power, all of the policy comes from property owners, because they're the only ones who get notified on zoning changes. They're the ones who speak up on things like short-term rentals you may have read about, all of those things. And so it's imperative that people who rent, we work on as a policy. And this is something that you all can help me from an employee perspective, as well as through your clients. Help us figure out how to hear the voices of people who do not own property. That I just wanted to put that out there in case we actually stayed on topic, which was not this at all. So if we do get a chance, I'd love to work with you more on that, because it's going to be a huge initiative for me, and I think a few other council members policy wise, is how do we hear the voices of the people that do not own property?
Love that. Thank you so much. So kind of building on that, I think a number of you brought up both, positive, hopeful things, but also challenges that you're seeing. I'd like to hear specifically when you think about some of the things that you've seen where the built environment has been a negative. So you you talked about social isolation in your homes, lack of walkability, lack of transport that works for women, because for any of you guys that don't know, the way that women tend to move about, especially using mass transit, is completely different than men. And that's because there's so much caregiving that tends to happen with women. So it's, you may be going to work, but you're also going to an appointment, you're taking your your loved one somewhere, you're doing some grocery shopping, you're going to childcare, back to work, et cetera. And so it doesn't look as linear as a lot of our highways and structured systems are. So I would love to hear you guys talk about, all right, one issue that you're like, this is in my craw, I'm just upset about this. And then what would you do? What would you like to see the city of Dallas to do, or the developers to do, the nonprofits to do, but also for the designers in this room, what could they do? Can you speak to that? Murphy, can you start us off?
Hello. That feels like a setup, but I'll go ahead and I guess it's like the private industry representative on the stage. A little bit more background on me. So after I was at the city of Shreveport, I worked for an organization called the National Development Council. And it was a partnership started by the Ford family and the Kennedy families in the 60s, really to spur and invest in economic development. So I did a few new market tax credit developments in South Texas. I did affordable housing in Memphis and New Orleans and what have you. Coming to Dallas, though, was the toughest city to try to get something done in. And I am not placing this at the feet of government, right? On the private side, we know to work with people on their motivation. In working with government, most government employees don't want to step out of the line to cause attention to themselves, right? So getting a government employee not to do what's in policy, 9 times out of 10 is not going to happen, right? It's really on the private side. And what I would like to see happen, and I have to say this very carefully, I would like people in low to moderate income areas of the city to be more thoughtful on how they choose their leadership, right? To be more to learn technically a way to get a real estate development deal or attract the business that you want to be brought in, right? For instance, in Dallas, North Dallas, we all read Dallas Morning News or Dallas Business Journal, what have you. You don't find out about a big deal until after it's signed and you see the dirt moving, right? In the southern sector, you have people announce stuff and be real happy about it. And the preliminary drawings aren't even done, right? So it is a way to put a deal together, attract capital, get a development partner. And then when people start asking what's that or who's moving in there, that's when you then announce it. So it's a way I would like people to be more thoughtful on how they choose leadership and how they pursue different opportunities. And that's not, I don't know where that starts, right? But that's maybe here, but that's not necessarily at the foot of government. I think that's more at the foot of neighborhood and community leadership.
All right. Janie, you want to jump in?
Well, first of all, I think it's really important for all of you because all of you are in positions of power. And the power that you have is in the design work that you do and how you influence your clients. And so I think being involved yourselves is important because you bring a different lens than if you're just the person designing as opposed to the person who understands what that design will do and those ripples. That's hugely important. I think the other thing is understanding that, for example, the inequities in this town from land use is so extreme. We could do a whole thing on it, and it's just it's crazy what's been allowed. That's all changing, and I think the voices in terms of like what's happened with Joppy and in West Dallas 1 with Singleton United and some of the organization that's happening is exactly what needs to happen. And as we move forward, Dallas, we're in the middle of two very important land use activities that are essential for you to stay on top of. One of them is Forward Dallas, which is our comprehensive land use planning. So everyone here has an opportunity to put through that website, Forward Dallas, what you think Dallas ought to be. So that's one very important tool. The other thing is we just passed the first two of what will be at least $4 million toward redoing our entire development code of the city. All of our zoning is about to change. And so you all need to influence that. But I need you all to do that. So that's one. The third thing is, I remember when I was on the Plan Commission, they told me rule number one was you can't zone for ugly. Okay. So as you're dealing with your clients, just remember who's actually going to be walking on that street or living there, whatever, and fight for that open space, fight for that transparency, things like that. You must. And that's how we're going to have a city that becomes more equitable, whether you're building a 5-story wrap and making sure that all of the units have doors to the street so that it's not a block face, monolith, or you can try to break up the blocks, just basic architectural stuff that I don't know what I'm talking about. I just know from my urban degree, my master's in urban planning. But in all seriousness, I think that we have many. Then the last thing I just want to add on that is in North Dallas, Southern Dallas, and I would say Southern Dallas is a development opportunity. South and North Dallas is a redevelopment opportunity. And so if we think of it from an infill and adaptive reuse and all of that, the creativity that's available there is enormous. And then the raw land, the place where we have to make sure that as we manage equity, we don't create new inequities. So that's the other big balancing piece, I think, to this. So that's what I'll.
And Maria, I'd love to hear you sort of build on that through your wealth of expertise, but also maybe talk about how you've tried to engage your students in opening their eyes to the things that we're talking about.
Well, I mean, first I want to applaud you for the work you're doing in Joppy. To me, that's an example of how we should engage with the community.
And for the people that are not aware, because we're a large firm, can you talk a tiny bit about that?
So it's one of the original Freedmen's towns. There's, I think, 6 of them that we're working with along the Trinity River. I think Joppy has always had sort of this foundation of leadership development and family members that have been very active in preserving that locale. It's been cut off because of zoning and code, et cetera. It's very difficult to get to, I think, because it's got a highway on one side, it has and a bridge, has a railroad on the other side, which is, I don't know how many lanes of tracks. And then the Trinity River is on the other side. So it's a challenging site. And I think that I applaud the community, I think, for all of their advocacy efforts. But again, you also for partnering with them. I think that for our students, it's been a terrific experience in that, they're engaging in ways that the community is leading the charge. I think that often, right, as students go through, their degrees or their licensing process, they are experts in the field. But I think sometimes we forget that community and residents, as you said, that live and will live with the changes are also experts in what they need. And so how do we recognize that, right, and move forward in a true partnership, right, where power is shared? And that's difficult to do because projects, particularly commercial projects, you have deadlines, you have funders, you have, right, things that you need to meet that drive that agenda, that drive that process. So when do you take time to engage a community to help them understand the technical language that you're using, right? That provide them full information on the options they have. And then we expect those community members to do all this work for free, right? We're all paid to go to these meetings, planners, everybody else, architects, design, we're all billing for our time. But we expect residents to sit and attend night meetings without daycare, without, getting time off from work, feeding their families, right? We expect them to do all this to rectify part of what we've all created. So how do we think differently about this paradigm? And I want our students to understand that you're right. They have power just like we all have power here. And these residents also have power that we need to recognize and have on their own terms.
Amen. Oh, love that. So Chris, I'm building on this conversation here. And then Murphy, if you want to add, sorry. But as they were speaking, I was just thinking, Force Forward is such an example of this, right? It's the private and the public. It's nonprofit. It's, in so many levels, it's education, entertainment, housing, and different levels of housing. So can you kind of speak to what you've seen there and how you feel like you all have conquered some of these things or tried to, with
Sure.
the community?
Sure. And I want to make sure I come back to things that make me irritated. Because just going to put a pin in that. We'll return to it. But a more positive note, it is really clear when you work with communities that have been let down or have been betrayed or have been de-resourced in these intentional ways, that there's a gap of trust that it is incumbent on the leadership and on the professionals who may be engaging with them. It's incumbent on you to fill that gap and to demonstrate the worthiness of your effort to meet their trust. And that is a long process, and that is not just, it can be a long process to get funded for your project, but it's a longer process to make sure that it's worth doing. And that's something that we have taken really seriously. And I think about just an example from my perspective coming into the organization in the past year. We made some design changes that were necessary and are going to benefit the project greatly. They're going to change the facade a little bit. They're going to change the size, the footprint of the building. Of course, there's going to be parking impacts, all sorts of other interesting things that happen because of that. But we spent probably 3 to 4 months going to neighborhood association meetings, having individual meetings with pastors and with community groups and with a couple folks who really have strong opinions, and meeting you at a barbecue place or meeting you at your church or whatever, and making sure that we give the full presentation that we would give to city council, that we give to a finance person. We get the full rundown to those folks. It could be an audience of 2, or an audience of 500 or 1,000 or whatever. And we accord those people the same respect and defer and have long conversations with them, ask what they think, record their feedback, incorporate that into our meetings that we have upstairs at HKS every week to make sure that we are being transparent in terms of what we're hearing from the community and what we are sharing with the firm and with others who are involved in this design process. And that's just the footprint and the exterior. You understand? So that when we talk about programming and uses and how DSD is going to be involved and whether we're going to have a coffee shop there and who's going to run it, all that kind of stuff, we dig deep. And again, there are ways to do this where you can just blow by that stuff. And if you got enough money and you got enough lawyers you can just skip over that part. You can do it. And eventually you can hire the right PR person, right communication firm. You can smooth over some of that stuff. And for a while, it might work for you. But in the long run, it's an unsustainable approach. And also you've lost your soul, which is more important, you know. And I would just encourage you as we think about this and how, you know, we've tried to approach this, our organization, and see how like getting to know the teachers in the classroom, the kids at the school, and what they might need, how we can best support, how we can work with DISD to fund this, and how we can connect the program of the theater, and how all these projects are connected, and where we put columns in the building, what the facade looks like, are also integral to those decisions, right? Means that you have to spend time investing in and being accountable to a community. And we may have different strategies for doing that. We may have different ways of approaching that. But the heart of it has to be not whether you can get your project done, not whether we can get this instrument funded, not whether you can get X or Y thing accomplished. It has to be a solidarity with the people in the community. And that's your North Star. And to me, that's what I've really treasured our time at the Forest Force so far, is that is what we come back to. Every time we're in a meeting and every time we get taken to task by somebody in the community or an elected official or whoever, present company excluded, we're cool. You know, we learn and we're a learning organization. We take that seriously and we try to apply that and be accountable in the ways that make sense. Our board is really strong in that regard. So I think all these things that I've seen where it's about decisions you make about your internal culture, about your accountability structure internally, to the way you run your project, the way that you run your organization, the way that you think about funding, the way that you think about your partners, the way you approach donors. Those are leadership and culture decisions for your organization or for your firm or for your team or whatever that impact whether or not you can hold your head up when you walk through the neighborhood. Again, you might be able to build the thing, but can you walk down the street and go to it, you know, with your head held high? And there's a difference. And I want to be able to do both those. And that's a journey in the process. So.
All right, thank you. Yeah, you said that you have something in your craw. You want to get it out. You want to talk to us about solutions.
Oh yeah, let's just see the floor to me.
Okay, okay. I mean,
it's a great idea.
I'm mindful of the time.
Right. Okay.
Because Councilmember Schultz has a meeting. So if it's okay, I'm going to go through the next question, but you could weave the two together. Okay.
Sounds great.
I'm going to, yeah, go ahead. So our next question is really just directly, and I think some of you guys have started to touch on this, but is like, what's the role for the people in this room as designers? You know, you kind of start to hint at getting involved in your community, showing up and, you know, walking the streets, meeting them where they are. And I think all of that is super important. Getting involved with the city planning meetings, with all of that. Like what, for each of you, I'd like to start with Councilmember Schultz, but what do you see as the role for design partners like HKS in helping to create a more healthy and equitable urban places for everyone?
Well, I think second, there we go. Okay, I think there's two roles. There's HKS as the company and your corporate responsibility in terms of being involved. And then there's you all as professionals. So I'll just very quickly touch on both. One is for HKS as professionals, the city is undertaking arguably 4 to 6 transformational projects that we're trying to do on our own. And we could really use your help. We really could use your help. And I understand full well that everybody's, you know, especially for-profit companies, it's essential. But if there are opportunities to share your wisdom about how we do Hensley Field, the International District, UNT, Pleasant Grove, you know, some of those key projects that will change this city forever, we could really use your help and your insight on that. And through pro bono stuff, whatever you do. I mean, and then comes to the individuals like Jennifer, who's dedicating hundreds of hours of her own time to serve on boards and committees. I'm looking for someone right now. If anyone's interested in the MLK board, I have an opening. I don't care if you live in District 11. I want someone who's going to devote time and effort to the Martin Luther King Center. I need someone for that board. We all have about 30 boards and commissioners to be involved, but also in those transformational projects that I mentioned, mentioned, I'll personally talk about the Dallas International District, corner of Main and Main, a $5 billion economic play. I need people who know what they're talking about to say, I want to learn more about the automated transportation system. I want to be on the school foundation board that you're building. I want to help make sure that park happens. And so we need you all, especially those of you who are younger. We don't have your voice in anything. We need you to shape the future so that you don't have to clean up the mess later. You want to, get involved now. So that's what I would ask from you all.
I think as a global firm, you have such an advantage. You are all well-traveled. You have ideas that you can bring to the table that could really inform and kind of expand options. I just took a group of faculty to Mexico City as we're building partnerships with universities there. And most had never been to Mexico City. And they were amazed at the public art everywhere, the architecture of the buildings, the public transportation. You have designated bicycle lanes, that allowed for people. And they also have a free, well, it's almost free. It's a very low cost bicycle lending program in the core of the city. So you can pay, I don't remember what it was, $20 a year. And then you can just hop on off a bike, and they have electric bikes. And, again, there are ideas that are working in the Southern Hemisphere that we don't always look to that could work here, right? We don't always have to think about what we see in our own little world, and some people do. They think these are all the possibilities. They're not. There's all kinds of ideas out there. So I think as designers, as creative people, as well-traveled and well-informed and educated people, bring those ideas to the table. I think that we could benefit from having all these different perspectives.
I know Councilmember Schultz needs to go. So I'm giving you an opportunity to walk away if you want, but I have a story that's got you in it. So I'm going to tell it as quickly as I can. Okay, perfect. All right. So this was several years ago. I was much younger, and yeah, it is, isn't it? My bio was shorter and so on, but I was working at Paul Quinn, and we were dealing with an issue around a zoning issue around concrete batch plants. We're going to put one in down the street from us, and it was going to make life much worse for the folks down the street from us and worse for our students as well. So we had a coalition of folks that were brought together, just neighbors, and made a bit of noise about it. And eventually, we're able to have some substantive meetings with both the council and with the City Plan Commission, which at the time, Councilmember Schultz was a part of. And there's a series of meetings, and a lot of fascinating things were said in the meetings. And I go back and check those notes sometimes just to refresh my memory. What an exciting time that was. We were ultimately victorious in getting that concrete batch plant shut down. And thanks in part to a decisive leadership from Councilmember Schultz, which I really appreciate, and voted against the City Planning Commission from our district, actually, in that process, which was gutsy. You may not know that's gutsy, but it was. And it made a big difference to us. And I always remembered that. But another thing I always remembered, that was a good thing I remembered. Another thing I remembered was that in one of these zoning meetings, I believe it was the chair at the time, I'm not sure, looked at all of us neighbors there who were together, college. I mean, it wasn't SMU, but it was a college as far as I recall. And neighbors, they didn't live on Mockingbird, but they lived together in a street as far as I recall. Looked at all of us there and said, after we'd given our comments, and as you know, the way the rules work, you can't respond once they're responding. So she said, look, I've looked at the maps of this area, and this is not a real neighborhood. This is not a real neighborhood. I just remember sitting back and writing down very big letters I wrote some other words in my journal, but very big letters, writing that down and taking it back to Michael Sorrell, President Sorrell at the time, talking about it. He's like, she did us a favor by saying that. She clarified how she sees it. And, to my mind, there's a way to approach this work where you learn your trade, but you lose your heart. Right? And all people on that commission had reasons to be on it. All professionals, all accomplished, all understood the zoning laws. They could all read the letter of the law. They could all interpret that thing. But somewhere along the way, they decided that they were going to be the ones who knew it was best for the Black folks in that neighborhood and for the people most affected by adjacency and by poor zoning decisions historically, that they were the ones and not the residents and not the potential future residents, that they just knew better. And if there's one thing that I would tell you to do as professionals is, I mean, what you can do as an architect is say, these people have a dream and I can show them how to build it. I can show them how to build it. They've got an idea and I can say, here's what it would be like in concrete and wire, right? I can fill empty space with something that you only dreamed of. I can help you get from where you are to there. I can help you do it. And the risk is that you'll lose that fire for them. And I don't want that to happen. I want you to learn that trade. Learn that trade so that you can use it for the people that matter. And don't get distracted by the fact that some of them have lots of money, and some of them don't. Because a life in solidarity with people who really deserve your attention is a life repairing the damage we've done to these communities. And that's what we're in the midst of. We're in the midst of repairing damage that was done by models of economic development. They weren't just random roads we built in there. We built them to make people money. We built those roads and we disinvested that infrastructure and we built houses somewhere else. We did it because it made some people money and some people didn't matter, right? And if you're not careful, that is the bargain you'll make, because it's the bargains on the table for all of us, right? So it's up to us to learn our trades, but also keep our character. And that's my hope for you and whatever work you're doing, is that character is solidarity with especially the poor and the working class people of cities like this who need your help, because they can't make those dreams concrete by themselves. They need people who can draw the plans and stand up for them at council.
Yeah.
They need partners in this work. They had the energy, they had the vision, but you're irreplaceable in that ecosystem.
I mean, just, hear that, because I think sometimes we forget how much we are trained and how much we are skilled in being able to just envision different options and spaces and futures based along land use and building types, and being able to serve on boards is really an amazing way to like both realize your own value and have a positive impact outside of all the great work that we do here. So last,
Can I just, I'm sorry to interrupt,
Yes.
but you hit on a point that I've thought about a lot. And we have inserted ourselves in many of these activities. Southern Gateway, Old City Park, Choppy, Floral Farms, through our citizen HKS. And we get to a point to where we've done the visualization, we've put together the boards, we've put together the material to have public meetings, to garner support and get momentum. And then they stall. And they stall, and I don't want to be presumptuous here, but it seems to me they stall because of two things: lack of funding, which is probably the most important, but also a lack of leadership or knowledge how to take it further. We can only do so much, but when you think about something like Clyde Warren, that had so much behind it, had money behind it. It had, people that knew how to raise money. It had, donor specialists. It had program managers, and that's a example of a place that had all of the benefits, all of the resources, and they got it done. So when we're in a position to where we can help visualize what can happen, but the other resources aren't there, what do we do then?
Can I just jump in and then I'll. I think that here's what you can do. What you can do is to initiate or help with people who are willing to initiate in actual grassroots leadership development training. How do you run a meeting? How do you organize people to speak at council? How do you read all of those plans that they're going door to door explaining to people? How do you organize your neighborhood? That grassroots leadership training that those of us who come from privilege were taught in, I learned starting in my high school youth group, they taught me how to do that stuff, right? A lot of people didn't have that gift. And so I think this company could be at that. Nobody else is doing that. Nobody is teaching people how to own their own environment. And I think that would be just like transformative for everybody, because we desperately try. I've been spending the last 2 years building up my own neighborhood leadership, and these are, so anyway, I'll drop it. I'll say that.
Can we give Councilmember Schultz a huge round of applause? Thank you. This.
Can I follow up though? Because I think that's a really excellent question. And I think that's a challenge in that we have, there are models for doing this kind of work. One is, for example, look at California Endowment in California, where they used, when Blue Cross Blue Shield went for profit, they had to contribute to this foundation. So they have a ton of money, but they're using health as sort of a proxy for community development, community improvement. So they're engaged. I think they started with 14 communities across the state. I don't know how many now, but they basically do that kind of leadership building, engagement with community, thinking about what the community needs, but building leadership from within, so then they can engage with policy. So they go and have accountability meetings with elected officials to say, what have you done for me lately? You promised me X, Y, or Z, and that didn't happen. So I think that's where the nonprofit foundation work could be really helpful if there's a process, a partnership that occurs at the beginning, right? So as we assess, some of these neighborhoods that need help, and we create a design plan, really before that or parallel to that, we need to also start building those partnerships so that leadership starts to develop and is involved from the get-go and have the capacity, right, to continue the work as people drop off, because life happens, right? Not everybody can stay and lead these kinds of major projects long-term. So how do you start building that within a community? And frankly, we could help. I mean, I think all of us educational institutions can do that work as well. Partner with you, start working with those communities you want to identify for sort of these longer term projects, but that needs to happen early on. So we need to maybe just be more intentional about where do we really want to make a change, and are all the components there?
I appreciate that. So what we're talking about essentially is like workforce development, right? And we had a conversation about this. You could build the most beautiful building in the world. You could build brand new houses. You could take all of the new McMansions in West Plano and put them in South Dallas and what have you. But if the people in that neighborhood don't have the skills to then attract the income to then support those brand new shiny assets, your investment is not going to produce results, right? So we at CBRE just partnered with Paul Quinn. We made a major investment in with Paul Quinn, and speaking with President Sorrells, who's my frat brother, he said that one thing that was amazing to him when he took over Paul Quinn is a lot of students came there, they wanted to get a degree or something in nonprofit leadership and how to raise money. And he was like, why are all these students focused on nonprofits and not all these other professions that make much more than a nonprofit professional? By the way, I think running a nonprofit is twice as hard as running a for-profit, because as a nonprofit, you have to raise money and accomplish your goal that you set out to do. At a for-profit, if I'm just selling a pen, if I'm selling a soda, you know what my intention is, right? So I don't have to kind of play that back and forth. So what I'm getting to, and thank you for saying that. So in 2020 and then 21, it became permanent. We created a partnership between Grambling State University, my alma mater, and Arizona State University's Master's of Real Estate Development program to have a real estate degree program at Grambling State University. That's unfortunately the first HBCU that has a real estate program in the nation, which is crazy to me, right? So back to the initial question of what you all can do. Yes, serve on boards. Lord knows we have enough things pulling at our time, day in and day out, right? I coach right now 65 diverse brokers throughout the US with CBRE, and I tell them you can only afford to really spend time on 2 nonprofits because they're going to committee you and volunteer your time away, right? So at the end of the day, what you really can do is show people your profession who aren't exposed to your profession. right? Show people that you have a viable career. I didn't know real estate development was an industry till I was 27, 28. And that was from a friend of mine, right? So I was an accountant for KB Home. I was a loan officer for a bank. So a friend of mine who walked through the building, his uncle owned the building. I didn't know people could own buildings. I thought the bank owned the building, right? He was like, no, you're a tenant. That blew my mind, right? So what you all can do individually is show people who look like you and who don't look like you, your profession, the skills that it takes to do what you do, and put them on a path to then go earn and generate that revenue, generate that income, and then reinvest that income wherever they choose to live. I think that's a long-term solution, and that's something that's viable, and that's workforce development. I think what we said.
All of this. Thank you so much. And I mean, shout out to the amazing people throughout HKS that do just that. And I hope more of us get involved with that, but it is training and showing up at different schools and different programs to do that. So thank you guys. Now we're going to transition to Dr. Lorin Carter. You guys can stay on stage if, as long as the light is not in your eyes. And I'm going to try to control these slides. Ooh, look at this. Great. Even better in person though. So Dr. Carter, and Ashley, her slides are going to be here. Okay, perfect. Great. So Dr. Carter, I met her through her work on the Southern Gateway Park, or Deck Park, and was just totally blown away by her passion, her enthusiasm, her extremely long bio that includes so many different degrees, and yet so young and so committed. She is passionate about facilitating healthy, vibrant communities and equipping people with the tools they need to do the types of things that we're talking about here. She has degrees in civil engineering, law, higher education, and public policy, as well as urban planning. And she is the founder and CEO of C-Suite Equity Consulting and has won awards for her work working with HKS as well as many other partners. So give it up for Dr. Lorin Carter. Woo! I believe you will just have this. You click here. Probably. Does this one work too? Let's see. Yes, it does. Okay, there you go.
Okay, so we're gonna pause for a second. That was a lot to take in. So just kind of shake it off. To continue now, everybody moving, feeling fresh. That was a lot. I mean, it's a lot to take in. But the good thing about it is that everything that they said that you heard, now you'll start to see some spatial representation for and some actual projects that have done this in the city of Dallas.
Brian, do we have a mic check?
Yeah, we'll need her to use the microphone while she's up there. Okay.
Here.
Okay. All right. Everybody ready to get started? All right. So I'll try this one first, and if not, then we'll go with the other one. But today we'll talk about making urban spaces equitable places for all. I'm Dr. Lorin Carter. The great thing about this is that that's our company's tagline. So it worked perfectly and was an easy subject for us to roll into. C-Suite Equity Consulting is an award-winning firm that focuses on equity, justice, and social impact solutions. We work in strategy development, community planning, capacity building, and today, like speaking. All right. We have 4 main focus areas, all looking from a racial equity lens. So we focus on racial, social, environmental, and economic equity, really helping to create a holistic view of what an urban environment can look like when it's created with an equitable intent from the beginning, or if we find ourselves in situations like we are in Dallas, having to reimagine the space that we call home. All right. So today we'll talk about social determinants of health. So we'll talk about the city, all of the topics that we heard, and you kind of heard that phrase thrown out a little bit, but we'll dig deeper into it and what it really means for other components outside of, traditional attitudes about health, what that means, how it impacts our overall quality of life.
Right? So why is this important? Why are we talking about this? Why are we spending time? Why are you getting continuing education credits for it? And it's because health disparities continue to rise. COVID-19 exacerbated existing disparities, and it didn't stop at the end of 2020. Those things continue, whether it's inequities in health, inequities in income, inequities in housing access, food access. So we're seeing those same issues now at higher and greater levels and throughout every income range. Okay? And understanding how it impacts us, not just from one position, but looking at it across kind of a continuum, will help us get a better picture of how we can improve overall quality of life for residents. Okay? So Dallas is growing, it's booming. As we heard in our first speaker here talk about, it went from 3 million people, so now we're at 8, and very shortly we will have tripled that original number. So why is this relevant to DFW? A few things: historical inequities. I'll show you a slide in a minute where you'll see it's over or almost 100 years old, but patterns still exist in the city that follow that map. We see things like back at the turn of last century, where the Klan had its largest membership in Dallas, where it had a day at the state fair, where you were invited to come out and meet your favorite Klansman. I'm not making this up. You can check the Dallas Morning News. Those are the kinds of things that Dallas has as its history. And it also has a history of not adequately addressing it or acknowledging that those things took place. But in order to move forward and create a more equitable future, we always have to acknowledge our past. We don't stay there. We understand it, so we have context for where we are and we know how to move forward. So those are the types of things that happen. We have freedmen's towns that you heard about before, like the Bottom or 10th Street, Joppy, all of those areas in Uptown that used to not be Uptown. Those are all areas that freed slaves settled. And as that area became appealing to a different demographic, they were pushed further south. And so now those communities have become enclaves where disinvestment has happened, and they have not been given the resources that they've needed for decades. What we are seeing is an uptick in interest now. And so you see millions of dollars from the city coming in to improve those neighborhoods. And there's an interest from a number of different people, but the voices of the people that live there are not always the ones that are heard the most clearly. And so that we have the issues of gentrification and displacement that happen. Then we have sustained inequality. Like I said, those patterns that have gone on for over 100 years, but there is some light at the end of the tunnel. We have the racial equity plan that was recently passed that is now requiring the city to take a racial view and look through all of its policies and its plans to make sure that it's not continuing racial inequities. And one that's recent, that if you've been following our legislature this year, it's the recall of 2020. And who knows what I mean by that? No one. Good. I hope you did. Okay. So the recall of 2020 is, during 2020, we had this racial reckoning, awakening. And now you see there was some performative measures. There were some that actually tried to put in practices and approaches that would help, like the Limitless, nod to HKS, and others that did it more to say, we've checked that box. There was no resources in place. There was not staff put in place to help support those positions. And so a few years later, now the narrative is it didn't work. And you saw in our legislature last week that now DEI positions have been outlawed in all Texas universities. So you think about where we were, what we continue to have to fight against. How can we take this, things that are within our control, the built environment, social constructs, and policy, how can we be proactive in making things better? Right? So we're going to look through this from an equity lens. Our country started out with equality, so trying to make everybody the same, and we see now that that really does not work. Equity is a step towards justice. So equity really addresses making sure that people are met where they are. So if you're 2 feet tall and the fence is 5 feet high, we're not going to give you a 2-inch stool, right? Because it won't help you to see over it. We'll give you what is needed to help get everyone where they have equal access or equitable access to opportunity and resources. The step after that is justice, where we begin to reimagine the systems that we exist within. And so the frame that we'll take from this, or the framework that we'll look at, is social determinants of health. And what it does is realizes that people's lifestyles and the conditions and where they live. So think about your neighborhood, where you get up in the morning, what's nearby. Do you have a grocery store? Is there a trail? Is there a movie theater? Is there anywhere you can go for entertainment? Your favorite coffee shop, your school, how far you have to travel to work? All of those things that impact your neighborhood actually strongly influence your health and the longevity of your life. Right? So on the left, you'll see the adopted framework and how our government talks about social determinants of health. It puts them into 5 buckets. So we're looking at education, access, and quality, healthcare access and quality, economic stability, neighborhood and the built environment, and social and community context. So social determinants of health, very quickly, are all the non-medical factors. So this is not high blood pressure. This is not whether or not you have asthma. If you have a little COVID pound still lingering in 2023, none of that is considered. These are all things that impact where you're born, how you grow, you work, you live, and age, and all the wider set of forces, systems, and constructs that we live within, and how those policies and norms that we live in day to day impact our overall quality of life. And so social determinants of health looks at these 10 areas. This was the original framework when the authors were asked to put it into a framework where policymakers could understand it, people in education, where it could be something everyone could lift up and understand. And these were the 10 key things they wanted us to know. 1, social gradient. So that's looking at often, I'm an engineer, like my first trade. So 2 and 2 is always 4. When I went to law school, it was a little gray. I didn't understand gray area. I'm sure as architects, y'all get that too. But the social gradient moves us from a binary. So it's not either or, it could be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, anywhere along that line. And it causes us to think about things in a much more detailed and nuanced way, instead of saying either you're poor or you're rich. No, not quite. You could be poor, could be working poor. You could be 1 paycheck away from not having enough. You could be okay because you have about 5,000 in savings, but if you lost your job, you'd be in trouble in 2 months. So it gets us to thinking about all the people along the way, from the lowest economic earners to the highest economic producers in our society. And then the impact of stress. If you have any health condition, or anyone in your family has, stress exacerbates everything. And it's the same way when we think about overall quality of health. Early life, think about the ability of your zip code to determine your outcome in life. And one of our speakers mentioned that earlier. Social exclusion, again, was mentioned by one of our speakers before. Your ability to feel like you are a part of the fabric of the place in which you live. You're included, you have access, you feel appreciated and welcomed. Then work. Do you enjoy your work? Your bosses are here, so I hope everyone's saying yes. So you enjoy your work and you have access to meaningful work, things that you want to do, that you're uniquely skilled and qualified to do well. And then unemployment, how stable is your job prospect? How stable are you when it comes to your career and advancement? And then social support, going back to the idea around your community. What relationships are present where you live? What supports do you have if you need a daycare? Is someone there where you could get that type of service nearby? Addiction, one of the things that happens normally when one of the other aspects is a little bit off. And then food, we all need that at least 1 or 2 times a day. So do you have access to healthy food? Is it affordable? And how does your access or the affordability of what's nearby impact your overall health? And then finally, how do you travel within your sphere of existence? Right? So this is the map that I mentioned. It is from 1934 or 37, and this was a federal map. So one of the things that we heard earlier was about private industry and private industry helping to drive positive change. Unfortunately, in the earlier part of last century, our federal government ingrained racism into how our country operated, how mortgages were issued, and whether or not other investments would be supported by the federal government. So you'll see a ranking from A, B, C, and D. A was where it's normally white only or all European born in those areas. And then anything from C to D was higher incidence of people of color. So whether that was Black, Hispanic, Italian, anybody else that was not white, the higher concentration of those groups would get categorization of C and D. You may have heard the term redlining, and that's where this comes from. For some of you, this map will be familiar. For others, this will be your first time. But redlining literally was the red lines drawn around areas where people of color lived. That sign and that color meant that the federal government would not back or would have very unfavorable rates for any type of lending instrument in those areas. So if you're a bank and someone tells you, I'll give you 2% if you invest in A, but I'll give you 10% if you invest interest rate that you have to pay back. If you invest in D, which one would you go with? A 2% or a 10% interest rate? This is interactive. Come on, talk to me. 2%, right? Because you want to pay less money and you want your investment to be insured, right? If you're giving money out and the government says we have a program, we'll pay you back, you want to be paid back if you qualify. So that's where you start to see investment in certain areas where it's dense, where it happens often, and then disinvestment or the lack of investment in other areas by both public and private entities. So keep this in mind. And then we're going to move forward to 2022 housing and commercial values. If you look at, hopefully you can see that clearly. Okay, the north and south and CBD, Central Business District areas, and you'll still see stark differences in property values, right? Percentages almost, very different because these things perpetuate. Once you make investments, once you build buildings, hopefully you don't expect for them to be torn down 5 years later, 10 years later. So if you're building for long-term and investing long-term, those impacts can be felt for generations. Now we have the opportunity to go in and find ways to change this. So when you look at the city of Dallas, and on the right, you'll see a dot density map. So for every dot, it's about 8 people. Just know it's a lot, the more you see the color. And then on the left-hand side, there's an update from 2020 to 2022. So you see those population separations or distributions there. But again, that same pattern is present in the city where you see predominantly people of color in the South, predominantly people that are of European heritage or Caucasian at the top of the city or the northern half of the city. So not only do we have property values following those same trends, we have lines of segregation in how our city is populated following those trends as well. So now when we look here, you'll see the differences in poverty and income. So income is on our left-hand side and poverty ratio is on the right. Again, deeper, this is for, deeper on the portion, let's see where it is for you. On the right-hand side, increased poverty levels in the southern sector. And it's the reverse, like income or difficulty with income, where you see the deeper levels of red in the bottom there. Okay. Now, Brian, will this play? Okay, there we go. So this is showing you the difference in life expectancy in the southern sector of our city versus Highland Park, one of the wealthiest suburbs, if not the wealthiest suburb nearby that's actually adjacent to the city of Dallas. Wait for it to go. So anywhere between about 10 to 15 years difference between those two zip codes. And this goes back when we talk about your life expectancy, early childhood. You haven't done anything, but just because of where you're born, your life expectancy can be a decade different just by that. That speaks to inequities in the space where you live, the difference in opportunity and access that is present in the place that you call home. All of these are structural, whether that's physical in our built environment or it's built in the way that our social norms and our policies are constructed. Okay. And then here again, we look at the difference in poverty rate. We look at median income And one of the things that social determinants of health talks about is often, well, kind of the rage or frustration that can come from income instability or decreased access. It limits your ability to engage in your social environment and creates a sense of frustration when you feel like you can never move forward or you don't have enough for basic things. And you'll see the differences there from 2020 to 2021. Right. And then our next one is looking at the availability of employment. So all of the headquarters, and this is from the City of Dallas's Economic Development Department, you see all of the headquarters are in what part of the city? The northern part. How many are in the southern sector? You have to look hard, don't you? Right. And that's the same way residents feel. They're looking for opportunity, but there's a dearth of it available. And so now you see those movements to incorporate more businesses and more small business entrepreneurship efforts in the southern sector. It's because they're trying to create more centers of employment where there's more access and more opportunity for all members of our city. Okay. And then this next one is from CPAL. So they looked at within a 2-mile radius of schools in DISD, what types of resources were available. And you'll see the spectrum on the right-hand side. Each one of the dots will tell you like how much support is available for students within their 2-mile radius. So basically where they would go and move throughout on a daily basis. And you'll see that also change and get closer to the further end of that spectrum, the further north that you go. So again, think back to that map that we looked at originally. Those trends from 1934 are still in place. They're built in, baked into our system, but we have an opportunity to change those things through design, through engagement, through policy. Okay. And then this also looks at, we talked a little bit about zoning. So you'll see here, industrial zones are in what area of the city? Southern sector, and they are predominantly in Black and Hispanic areas. I think almost all of them are in those spaces. So one of the things that has also happened, not only where we build, but also how we zone. And we heard that conversation a bit, how transportation has been used to separate, to block off, to cut off communities, industrial zoning, and hazardous zoning. So environmental uses like landfills, those types of things have often been permitted in communities of color, where they have been caused to bear more of their, you'll hear this term often, fair share of the environmental burden. And this is one spatial example of how that plays out in our city. Okay. Now, jobs proximity. Where you live directly impacts your access to resources and your types of jobs. So in the southern sector, or the way that this map will work is 1 to 10 is basically, think about that as the number of jobs that's available on a ratio. So the lower you are on the number, the smaller opportunity you have for jobs that are close or nearby to you. The higher you are on that scale, the more opportunity you have literally to kind of bump into a job as you walk around. Okay. So again, it's following that same spatial pattern that we see of the difference in the southern sector and the northern sector. And I'm showing these in a number of different ways. One, so you see how the social determinants of health layer. So you start to see compounds effects of things, but also you see the intentionality of this in every sector or part of your life. It's not just one part of what you do or how you live, it's impacting every part of people's lives in our city. Okay. Now, food access. How many of you live close to a grocery store? Like actual grocery store, you can get fresh vegetables, you can get meat, all kinds of options. Okay. Now, if you look at this map, you'll see the differences where it says less than 85% of, no, excuse me, over 85% of Dallas residents have access to a grocery store nearby. Not a convenience store, not a quick top or tip they can go in and just grab something, but a grocery store. And that's not a luxury. That's something you need every day. So again, you see the differences in how those resources are distributed. Now, how many of you have heard of recaps? No? Okay. They are racially or ethnically concentrated areas of poverty. It's a metric that HUD keeps when they talk about housing accessibility and opportunity within neighborhoods. The city of Dallas has consistently had about 20 or more recaps in the overall area of the city. Most of the time, they're in the same place. So over decades, these communities are over 40% of poverty. Also, over 40% of residents qualify as under the poverty line, and over 50% will self-identify as people of color or other minorities. So you think about putting people in enclaves that lack opportunity, and that's again a structural effect of the built environment. Okay, now, one of the options, again, on this social determinants of health is looking at access to transit or transport throughout the city. And I put DART up here because DART just did a revamp of their service area at the end of last year. And it was to help make sure that they were more responsive to citizens throughout the city. They are still getting feedback on that process and continuously improving. But this is one of the areas where we have seen in real time some response to the needs in different parts of the city. All right, so now that we've seen all of that, what now? Like, what do we do next? And we talked about some of the things happening at the city. So recently the city did an audit of its housing policy and found that it was not addressing inequities that currently existed in the city. And it was not putting things in place to make sure that it did not perpetuate those same inequities from continuing to occur. So from the equity audit, these were 5 things that they pulled out for the city to do. And one of the things that I think is extremely important was putting in SMARTY goals. In a lot of old city reports, there are reviews and information and recommendations, but not metrics, not strong metrics that hold them accountable to make sure that they are meeting the goals that they've put in place. And this plan is one of the things that is starting to turn that tide to say that not only will we promise to do it, but we'll hold ourselves accountable to our community through metrics and come back on a regular basis to make sure that we are doing what we said. Now, another example of how you can make a difference. This is from the Southern Gateway project. And on that project, I know you all were working on the physical side of it. Our firm worked on the equitable development plan. So one of the things we did with engagement was to start with a blank slate in all of our meetings. So this page would have been blank. And throughout the meeting, we fill this in with an artist in real time that took feedback from subject matter experts like myself and others that we would have from the community that come in that were experts. And then also what we call local experts or resident experts. And Dr. Cosio mentioned this earlier. We see local residents as experts in their space, and their expertise was prioritized as well. After every meeting, we were able to take these types of feedback and work with HKS on the design. So not only was the design sound from an architectural standpoint, it also was infused with community feedback and input so that once the design comes out, it's not a surprise and you already have community buy-in and feedback. The next thing that we did in that report was to create a metric system. So we looked at the different ways and the different people that could be involved, taking a 3-pronged approach: tactical, planning, and policy. Don't believe everything is the city's responsibility, nor is everything private industry or the residents. It will take everybody to be a part of those processes to make sure that it is productive and successful. So you'll see at the top, whatever the suggestion was, a quick summary in the next part. And in the middle was who was responsible. And this differed across I think we had 7 different indices, and it differed across each one. And then on the bottom, I thought was important, the partners. So who can we bring to the table to help make this come to life? And this is just another example on that same vein. And then the final one, looking at options for transit. So this is one of the things that Toyota actually invests in in West Dallas. And they help support that last mile of transit for residents to make sure that they can move and stay connected within their communities. All right, this was to set us up for the panel, but we will move forward to that. And that's my information. And I'll wait for you. Erin.
Thank you. Woo! Awesome. Thank you guys so much. And we'd hope to have a little bit of time for Q&A, but I think that's really the time that we have. And we are so appreciative of all of you for being here and for all of our amazing experts. Thanks one more time. Thank you. Thank you, Dan. Thank you all.